History books call him a monster, but science calls him a medical mystery that was thousands of years ahead of its time. How did ancient civilizations interpret complex genetic mutations before the discovery of DNA? Join us as we bridge the gap between supernatural myths and the actual mutations that created the real Geryon. Welcome to the Conjuring Files. Today, we open the vaults of history to separate myth from truth, confronting one of Greek mythology's most terrifying figures, Geryon, the three-bodied giant slain by Hercules in his 10th labor. But strip away the poetry, and what remains? What remains isn't a demon, it's a human anomaly, a rare biological event that ancient minds couldn't comprehend. To understand Geryon, we must look at the 10th labor. Hercules was sent to the edge of the known world, to the island of Erythea, the Red Island, a place of shadows where the line between the living world and the underworld was dangerously thin. His mission, to steal the magnificent red cattle belonging to Geryon. But these weren't ordinary beasts, and their master was no ordinary man. Guarding the herd was Orthrus, a two-headed dog, and the giant herdsman Eurytion. Orthrus himself is another clue to our mystery. In biology, we call this polycephaly. It's a condition where an embryo begins to split, but fails to separate completely. In classical art, Geryon is described as a towering figure with 3 heads, 6 arms, and 3 torsos, a nightmare made flesh. Poets like Stesichorus described him as born of night, a son of Medusa, cursed by the very gods themselves. But why did these cultures fixate on multi-limbed beings? Because they weren't just stories. They were observations. From Babylonian Lamassu to Hindu deities, polycephaly wasn't just fantasy. It was folk memory of rare, real births. When a child was born with 2 faces, it wasn't a medical case. It was an omen, a sign from the gods, a warning. In a world without genetics or ultrasounds, what else could it be? The horror was the unknown, and the unknown was divine. So the real horror isn't the myth. It's the moment an ancient shepherd saw a conjoined twin and called it a monster. Because sometimes the scariest creatures aren't born of hell, they're born of biology and fear. But how deep does the science go? Let's break down the mechanics. Geryon's description, 3 bodies fused at the waist, matches a condition known as dicephalic parapagus. In these cases, 2 distinct heads and upper bodies share a single lower half. To an ancient observer, this was a 3-headed giant in the making. There is also the phenomenon of parasitic twins, where one twin stops developing and is partially absorbed by the other. Even Aristotle recorded such occurrences, noting monstrous births that deviated from the natural order. To him, they were errors of nature. Pliny the Elder went further, cataloging entire races of people with multiple limbs or heads, blending biology with geographical mystery. Why does our brain react with horror? It's an evolutionary response to the other, a disruption of the symmetry we expect in our own species. In the ancient world, physical symmetry was tied to the soul. To be deformed was to be soulless, or possessed by something else entirely. When Hercules struck down Geryon, he wasn't just killing a giant, he was purging the anomaly from the heroic world. The poison of the Hydra used by Hercules represents the ultimate destruction of the biological outlier. Law over chaos, science over mystery. Today, we don't reach for arrows, we reach for scalpels. Modern surgery can often separate conjoined twins, giving each a life of their own. What was once a monster is now a patient. What was once an omen is now a triumph of human understanding. But do we lose something in the translation? The sense of wonder, or the warning that nature is far more complex than we assume? As we enter the age of CRISPR and genetic engineering, are we on the verge of creating our own monsters or our own gods? The cycle of myth continues. Every age has its Geryon, a mirror reflecting our deepest fears. In 2026, CRISPR gene editing technology has pinpointed the exact signaling proteins that cause axial bifurcation, the embryonic error where a single zygote fails to fully split, resulting in conjoined twins. One protein, sonic hedgehog SHH, if overexpressed, can trigger the development of multiple neural tubes, leading to dicephalic parapagus, 2 heads, 1 body. This isn't rare in nature. 2-headed snakes, 3-eyed frogs, even human cases. Abby and Brittany Hensel, born in 1990, share 1 torso but have 2 heads, 2 spines, and independent nervous systems. They walk, talk, drive, live full lives. But in 1000 BCE, they'd be called Geryon. Ancient witnesses had no concept of DNA. So when they saw a newborn with 2 faces, they didn't see a mutation. They saw a divine message or a curse. Roman historians recorded double-headed infants as signs of imperial doom. Egyptian priests mummified conjoined animals as sacred relics. And Greek sailors? They told tales of giants with 3 bodies because they'd seen something they couldn't explain. And in the absence of science, myth filled the void. Because to an ancient mind, a 3-headed man wasn't a patient. He was a prophecy, a weapon, a god. And once labeled a monster, he could never be human again. Next, the bones that prove Geryon wasn't just a story. In 2025, marine archaeologists diving near Ischia Island, ancient Pithecusae, the first Greek colony in Italy, uncovered a sealed tomb beneath volcanic sediment. Inside, they found anomalous skeletal remains, a single pelvis, but 3 sets of rib cages fused at the spine, with 3 distinct cervical vertebrae clusters. Forensic reconstruction confirmed it. This was not artistic exaggeration. This was a human who lived with triplicate upper torsos, a condition so rare only 3 documented cases exist in modern medicine. Bone density showed he reached adulthood. Wear patterns suggested he used all 6 arms. And the burial? Rich with pottery, weapons, and gold. Honored, not feared. This changes everything. Geryon wasn't invented. He was remembered. Perhaps this man was a chieftain, a warrior, a priest, his difference seen not as curse, but as divine favor. But as his story spread, oral tradition amplified it. 3 bodies became invincible, 6 arms became unstoppable. And by the time Hercules' legend formed, Geryon was no longer a man. He was a monster to be slain, because history doesn't preserve truth. It preserves what terrifies us enough to tell. And a man with 3 heads? That's a story that never dies. Next, why the Mediterranean kept producing these monsters, and what DNA reveals today. Tyrrhenian coast, home to Etruscans, Greeks, and Phoenicians, was a genetic bottleneck. Isolated villages, cousin marriages, limited gene flow, perfect conditions for recessive mutations to surface. Modern DNA sequencing of locals reveals ghost lineages, clusters of genes linked to Hox gene dysregulation, which controls body segmentation. These aren't monster genes, they're evolutionary echoes. And in antiquity, when such a child was born, it wasn't discarded. Often it was deified. The Etruscans worshipped multi-limbed spirits as guardians of thresholds. The Greeks saw them as children of chaos, like Typhon, father of monsters. But there's a darker truth. These anomalies shaped religious hierarchy. Priests claimed only they could interpret omens. Kings used monstrous births to justify wars. And the individuals themselves? Erased. Their humanity sacrificed to narrative. Yet today, we can sequence their legacy in a 2026 study. Researchers found elevated rates of polydactyly and craniofacial duplication markers in Ischia descendants. Proof that Geryon's bloodline never vanished. It just went quiet. Because the real immortality isn't in myth, it's in the DNA, still whispering after 3,000 years. Next, how one man's mutation became a pillar of Western myth, and why we must rethink all monsters. Geryon wasn't the only monster born of mutation. Cyclops, likely Cyclopia from maternal exposure to veratrum alkaloids. Minotaur, possibly a child with bull-like facial deformities. Even dragons may stem from fossil discoveries of protoceratops skulls, misinterpreted as serpentine beasts. In 2026, we no longer need gods to explain the unexplainable. We have genomics, paleopathology, and forensic anthropology. And with them, we can reclaim these figures, not as villains, but as the first recorded patients in human history. The real tragedy isn't that Geryon was killed by Hercules, it's that his story was stripped of his humanity, turned into a trophy for a hero, while his truth sank into myth. So the next time you hear of a monster, ask, was it evil or was it just different? In a world that feared difference more than death. Because the scariest thing about Geryon isn't that he existed. It's that we still call people like him monsters. Geryon wasn't a monster. He was a medical first. The oldest monsters weren't born of evil, but of ignorance. Subscribe for more truths behind the terror. The truth is in the Conjuring Files.